He once stood at the very top of the dancehall world, commanding stages, dominating charts, and influencing a generation. With a voice like thunder and lyrics that lit up the streets, Shabba Ranks was unstoppable. But then, just like that, he vanished. No farewell tour, no grand announcement, just silence. What really happened to Shabba Ranks? Why did one of the most powerful voices in reggae and dancehall suddenly disappear from the spotlight? Today we dive deep into his story, the rise, the fame, the fall, and the truth behind it all. Before the fame, the Grammys, and the global recognition, Shabba Ranks was just a boy named Rexton Ralston Fernando Gordon, born January 17, 1966, in the rough and resilient community of Sturgetown, St. Ann Parish, Jamaica. Life wasn't easy, far from it. Raised by a single mother in a deeply religious household, young Rexton grew up in an environment where poverty was real and options were limited. But like many kids in Jamaica, music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. From a young age, he found himself drawn to sound systems, the mobile DJs that blasted reggae and dancehall through the streets. The raw energy, the lyrical power, it called to him. He started performing on local sound systems under the name Co-Pilot, before eventually adopting the stage name Shabba Ranks, a nod to his deep commanding voice and street authority. His early style was aggressive, rebellious, and completely magnetic. By his late teens, he was already making waves in the local dancehall scene. Unlike many artists, Shabba didn't sing. He DJ'd in true dancehall tradition, spitting verses with rapid-fire energy, gruff delivery, and a charisma you couldn't ignore. He grew up on the sounds of Yellowman, U-Roy, and Brigadier Jerry, but Shabba brought something entirely new. His voice was raw gravel, masculine, unapologetic, and unforgettable. It wasn't long before record producers started to take notice. Jamaica's dancehall scene in the late 80s was fierce, cutthroat even, but Shabba thrived. His breakthrough came when he started working with King Jammy, one of Jamaica's most legendary producers. Hits like Wicked in a Bed and Roots and Culture turned him into a household name across the island. But Shabba wasn't meant to stay local. The world was about to discover what Jamaica had known for years. By the early 1990s, Shabba Ranks had exploded beyond the Jamaican music scene. His fusion of hardcore dancehall, a hint of hip-hop, and mainstream reggae created a sound that was both authentic and global. He signed with Epic Records, and that was the moment everything changed. His debut international album, Rappin' with the Ladies, didn't make much noise. But what came next? A cultural bomb. His second album, As Raw as Ever, released in 1991, featured the breakout hit Mr. Loverman, a track that would become iconic across continents. With its catchy hook, infectious rhythm, and Shabba's unmistakable baritone delivery, Mr. Loverman stormed the charts. Suddenly, a dancehall artist with a heavy Jamaican accent was dominating US and UK airwaves, a rare feat at the time. He followed up with Extra Naked in 1992, which included more hits like Slow and Sexy and Ting-a-Ling. This album didn't just succeed, it won him a Grammy Award for Best Reggae Album, making Shabba one of the first dancehall artists to win a Grammy. That moment marked a turning point, not just for him, but for the genre itself. Dancehall was no longer just underground. It had officially gone global. What made Shabba different was his confidence. His look, gold chains, oversized suits, slick hairstyles, and that bold, chest-thumping stage presence was something never before seen in reggae. He didn't try to fit into the mold of other artists. He redefined masculinity in dancehall, often referring to himself as the Emperor. And collaborations? He was one of the early artists to cross genre lines successfully. He teamed up with big names like KRS-One, Johnny Gill, and even Chaka Demus and Pliers, creating a sound that mixed dancehall fire with R&B smoothness and hip-hop edge. But as his fame soared, so did the pressure. The media spotlight intensified, expectations became heavier, and a storm was quietly brewing in the background, one that would soon challenge everything he had built. At the height of his fame, Shabba Ranks was a cultural force. gracing stages worldwide, receiving awards, and opening doors for other Jamaican artists. But what comes with fame? Scrutiny. In 1992, during a televised interview on The Word, a UK television show, Shabba made comments that would ignite a firestorm of controversy. When asked about homosexuality, he delivered a strong and controversial statement aligned with his religious and cultural beliefs at the time. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Major broadcasters began boycotting his music. Concert bookings disappeared. Epic Records, the label that once celebrated his crossover appeal, distanced itself. Almost overnight, the world that had embraced Shabba Ranks started closing its doors. And it wasn't just the media. The LGBTQ+ community, fans, and fellow artists publicly condemned his remarks. At a time when dancehall was beginning to achieve mainstream acceptance, his comments represented a step backward, and it hurt the entire movement. Shabba tried to clarify and later apologize for the statements, but the damage had been done. In an era before cancel culture even had a name, Shabba Ranks was effectively silenced in many parts of the world. His later albums like Ami Shabba and Rough and Ready Volume 2 failed to recapture the same buzz. Radio airplay faded. TV appearances vanished. The once bold emperor of dancehall now found himself fighting to stay visible in an industry that had moved on. But was it just the controversy? Not entirely. Music itself was evolving. Hip-hop was rising rapidly. Dancehall was shifting toward newer voices like Buju Banton, Beanie Man, and Bounty Killer. The younger audience began connecting with these fresh faces, and Shabba's once groundbreaking style now felt dated. Add to that internal battles, pressures of fame, industry politics, and the emotional toll of being pushed out of the spotlight, and Shabba began pulling back. The man who once stood center stage began fading into the background. But even as the headlines stopped mentioning him, his legacy was far from over. After the controversy and the shift in musical trends, Shabba Ranks didn't just vanish. He chose to step away from the mainstream. For many, it seemed like he disappeared. But behind the scenes, Shabba was reconnecting with his roots, his faith, and most importantly, his family. He returned to Jamaica, the place that shaped him. Away from flashing cameras and media scandals, Shabba began living a life far removed from the global spotlight. No more red carpets, no more big label pressure, just the peace of home. In this chapter of his life, he became deeply spiritual, leaning heavily into his Christian faith. For someone whose public image was once built on bold lyrics and high-energy performances, this quieter version of Shabba was a surprise, but a necessary evolution. He focused on family, especially his two sons. One of them, Shabba Ranks, even began pursuing a music career, carrying the torch in his own way. Shabba became a mentor, not just to his children, but to a new generation of Jamaican artists who looked up to him, even if the world outside had moved on. And though he kept his public appearances rare, they were always powerful when they did happen. Whether it was a surprise performance in New York or being honored in Kingston for his contributions to dancehall, it was clear people hadn't forgotten him. In 2012, Shabba made headlines again when he was recognized at the International Reggae and World Music Awards, IRAMA. His fans cheered, the industry tipped its hat, and his name began circulating once again. This time not for scandal, but for respect. He's never been one for long interviews or social media presence. In fact, that mystery has only added to his legend. Some believe he could have staged a full comeback. Others say he didn't need to. His work had already etched his name in music history. Through all the silence, Shabba Ranks lived a life of dignity, reflection, and resilience. A stark contrast to the flashy world he once dominated. He didn't beg for a second chance. He simply let his legacy speak for itself. Even though Shabba Ranks stepped away from the mainstream spotlight, his influence never disappeared. In fact, it's everywhere if you know where to look. You can hear his vocal delivery, the deep, growling tone and the rhythmic patois, in artists like Sean Paul, Beanie Man, and even Burna Boy. His fusion of dancehall with hip-hop was ahead of its time. Today, that blend dominates global charts. Reggaeton, Afro beats, and modern dancehall pop all carry DNA that traces back to Shabba's fearless genre bending. When he dropped Mr. Loverman, he didn't just make a hit, he set a blueprint for global crossover success. Without Shabba, there might not have been the same path for artists like Shaggy, Vybz Kartel, or Popcaan. Even in the US, legends like Jay-Z, 50 Cent, and Busta Rhymes have paid homage to Shabba. Kanye West referenced him. A$AP Ferg released an entire track titled Shabba to honor his style and swagger. That's not just respect, that's impact. And beyond the music, Shabba Ranks paved the way for how Black artists from the Caribbean and Africa could think bigger. International tours, fashion influence, cultural pride. He made it okay to bring your accent, culture, and message to a global audience without changing for the industry. Though he faced criticism and controversy, Shabba Ranks remains a foundational figure, someone who shifted the game and walked away without begging for validation. He may not be trending today, but his fingerprints are all over the artists who are. For an artist at the peak of global fame, Shabba Ranks' sudden disappearance from the mainstream was puzzling. He had the world's attention, Grammys, hit records, collaborations, and then he vanished. So what really happened? Part of the answer lies in how the industry changed. As hip-hop began dominating the 2000s, the US market moved away from reggae fusion. Labels became less interested in artists who didn't fit the new formula. Shabba, who refused to compromise his voice or style, wasn't willing to play the commercial game. Then there were the controversies. His outspoken comments, especially during the early 90s, led to backlash. Some promoters pulled shows. Media outlets turned their backs. In a time before social media could offer second chances or context, one misstep could cost a career. But that's only part of the story. Behind the scenes, Shabba was feeling the pressure of fame. He often talked about wanting a life rooted in his faith, family, and personal peace. He didn't want to be controlled. He didn't want to become a puppet for the industry. So instead of fighting the machine, he walked away from it. He returned to Jamaica, focused on his life away from cameras. Quietly still making music, but on his own terms. For Shabba, freedom was more important than fame. And that's perhaps the most misunderstood part of his story. He didn't fall off. He chose to disappear. Shabba Ranks' story is more than just a rise and retreat. It's a lesson in staying true to yourself. In an industry that often demands conformity, he was unapologetically authentic. From his lyrics to his image, from the rhythms he brought to global stages to the roots he refused to abandon. Shabba never let go of his Jamaican identity or his personal values. He showed the world that you can be bold, loud, confident, and still spiritual, principled, and deeply grounded. And while that honesty may have cost him some commercial spotlight, it earned him something greater: respect. Shabba's story teaches us that success isn't always about staying in the headlines. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away, when your peace is more valuable than applause. So the next time someone asks, "What happened to Shabba Ranks?" the answer is simple: he lived his truth. And that's powerful. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If Shabba's story inspired you, let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and don't forget, we've got more untold stories of Black icons coming every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.